hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast. Happy Tuesday. Today, our topic of discussion is emotionally unavailable parents and generational trauma. Sinead, take it away.
Alrighty. Wow, this is a really deep topic that I think you and I talked about it being so important because I think that a lot of the things that the issues that we go through, anxieties, depression, all of that, we've talked before on others in other podcasts about attachment styles. And I think this goes really deep with that as well, how your attachment style is developed from when you were born into childhood. And that connects really well with the emotionally unavailable parent and generational trauma. So for our speakers, sorry, for our audience, I should say, generational trauma, it's in your genes, literally. And people don't understand that, like, the trauma of your ancestors follows you through until you are the cycle breaker. So I'm a cycle breaker. Thank God. I've had a lot of patients that are cycle breakers as well. And I attribute that honestly to how mental health awareness has really heightened. The stigma is reducing. So I'm really excited about that. But the generational trauma, the way that your mom or dad raised you, the way that their parents raised them. So, just before the show, we talked, Tamara, about something that happened with me when I went to go visit my mom. And my sister-in-law was so funny because I was like, I cannot sleep at my parents' place, like my childhood home. And she was like, PTSD, you think? And I'm like, wait, what? And it's just, I don't know why it never connected for me. But one of the incidences that I had was we had a big earthquake in California, obviously, but this was my first one that I had felt. And I was changing my brother's diaper. I was 10 at the time, changing my brother's diaper in my room. And I just suddenly feel this house shake and that roaring sound. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? And my dad's like telling me to run down the stairs and get under the table. And I did that. But I didn't want to leave under the table after the shaking had stopped. And my mom was just kind of like, oh, just get up. It's fine. And didn't explain anything to me. My dad did explain stuff to me, but I truly believe there's something about the mother. Now, this is the woman that's like carried you for 9 months. One time I actually asked a psychiatrist, I said, can a baby feel unwanted from the womb? And he said, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, that my mom was there physically, she provided, but emotionally, even to this day, I love my mom to death now. We've done a lot of work together. However, to get a hug from her, it just does. My God, a hug from a stranger is so much better for me, which is kind of scary.
Yeah.
So, the emotionally unavailable parents, I really want to explain to the audience the importance that your parent can be there for you, like physically, can provide your home and food. But emotionally, do you feel safe with that parent? That's the
Ooh.
part that we have to look at that we'll be talking about here. And when we talk about generational trauma and integrating that as well, we have to look at how was she raised? And how was she raised? And how was she raised? So this is a really exciting topic. So I'm glad we're doing this today.
Yeah, I honestly, this topic really has so many different layers because there's just so many things that play a part in how a person is raised. First of all, where you come from, your cultural background, wealth, right? You have people that are poor, right? And they're actually having healthier relationships with their children. They're sharing the last thing that they have. However, they're very close and they're very together. And it's passed down where the kids might, they're encouraged to do better than them. However, that love and that family and that idea of a family, they're so closely knitted together. It's beautiful. And then you see people that come from wealth, right? You see people that are old money, as they say. And you see like a very different interaction sometimes. I'm not saying all times.
Yeah, I was gonna say not all times, but yeah.
Not all the time, no. Again, it depends on how they were raised, but a lot of the times you see that love, that void is filled with money. Like they will shove gifts, they will buy you a nanny, they will make sure that the kid is still raised by a nanny, right? It's still getting that love, but they're not getting their authentic love from their parents. And they're constantly craving that. Like, what would that feel like? Because everyone else has a mommy and a daddy, and everyone else is being paid attention to. And here I am, I'm with my nanny. I might speak three languages. I might go to the most expensive boarding school, but I am not getting the love and the needed attention from my caregivers, right?
Well, and we should say caregivers in this sense, the parent.
Yeah, the parents,
Because you have the
absolutely.
nanny, you're getting a little love from them, but there's something
Well, yeah,
different about.
but the nanny is the what caregiver. I would say it's still, the nanny wouldn't have been there had the parents not hired the nanny to be there to care for the child, right? So in my prior experiences, I used to work in child welfare for about 10 years. I'm currently still working child welfare, but in a different, very different capacity. But I did work with families and I did see what that generational trauma looks like and what it transpires into. And just seeing these neglected children, I'm just going to say how I saw it because
Mhm.
that was literally why I responded to certain calls and cases.
Yeah.
Seeing there's different aspects. Like a lot of my cases were domestic violence, domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, as we
Mhm.
say. And you see a cycle. You see a little girl being raised in a family where the two partners are physically and emotionally abusive towards each other. The child begins to model that behavior. She starts mimicking. Violence becomes a normal response.
Yeah.
Screaming, crying, having tantrums becomes a normal response, a response that's carried into different relationships,
Mhm.
friendships, intimate relationships when she grows up, for example. And that's how the generational trauma just travels through, right? So we're observing a girl, for example, with a mom and dad. I'm just gonna, the dad beat up the mom, was beating her up for an ongoing time. The child grows up, and for her, this is what love looks like. Because mom never left, mom never broke the cycle, mom never told her or explained to her that daddy hurting mommy is wrong, right? So the child internalized this and saw it as love. So when the child turned 22, and found her own abuser,
Yeah.
she continued that cycle. She had a baby with this person. The baby observed the domestic violence between the mother and her boyfriend.
So the cycle
And
continued.
unfortunately, I was also called into that case as well. I came in and I was like, wow, I haven't seen you in a while. And now I'm seeing the same repeat behaviors. So it's so important to talk about it, but it's also so important to talk about how to get out.
Yeah.
Because
I think the important part also is, we've talked about abuse before. We've talked about toxic exes, and why we don't value ourselves, why we don't get out. And I think that that's why we talked about wanting to talk about this topic is that a lot of times you don't recognize it because it's all you know until you break the cycle. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago while we were at Fordham and I had done the research and presentation on psychological abuse.
yes,
And so this goes to your point as far as how one third of those that were abused go on to do the same cycle. So recognizing it, I think, is the most important point, which is why I felt like this was really important for us to do because when all you know, what you've seen, you think, well, this is normal. It's not normal. I mean, listen, I love the fact that you brought in wealth, and we know that this isn't for all of them, but the fact that, parents aren't necessarily there and there's anxiety and you see these teenagers using drugs and finding different outlets to connect with others, connect with themselves because they don't feel connected to their caregiver. And yeah, oftentimes it's those that have less money. I mean, I know we talk a lot of times about poverty and how that creates problems, but you're not wrong. I mean, in a lot of countries, third world countries, they're really close and they have their parent there. So I don't know. So the signs that I would look for is, how does your body feel? When you're around this person, how does your body feel? What is it that you need? I had a patient similar to something you were talking about, but she had BPD and borderline personality disorder, which comes a lot of times from trauma. And her mom kept saying, well, but I provided everything. And they went through some really significant issues. And I asked the mom, I'm like, well, have you seen a therapist? I mean, I would encourage you to consider finding an individual therapist because she never processed the trauma. She was just trying to go like, I've just got to take care of these kids. And by the way, to your other point, this patient saw the mom being abused by the father and felt that she used the daughter as her, like protection, if you will. So there's a lot of resentment there, right? But this mother only knew what her mother taught her. And I did encourage the mother. I encouraged her to consider individual therapy to process the trauma. And I reminded her that her daughter, yes, mom provided food and shelter and, was there. But emotionally speaking, this poor little girl, now an adult, was just left to figure things out.
Yeah.
I mean, I was the same way growing up, right? I mean, I had to try to figure out what this earthquake was about. And I had to try to figure out, a lot of different things. And again, I love my mom, but like when my brothers and I talk, we're kind of like, we didn't have that connection with our mom. It was kind of like, I'm your mother and just do what I say. And it wasn't this kind of like even flowing thing and the safety factor, right? Emotional safety.
Yeah, so how, as a therapist right now, when you have patients like this that come to you with layers of unresolved, I guess, unprocessed emotions when it comes to just being abused and not even recognizing that this is what happened because they normalized it
Yeah.
and this now is their behavior. How do you unpack that with them? Because for me, what's been really effective is educating the patient around why and how the brain reacts after trauma, the brain chemistry changing once you are impacted by something, so that when you go on to have incidents that might not be of the same velocity, might not be the same exact thing that happened to you, but they trigger your brain response to react in the same way that you did back then, or to think that something as traumatic is going to happen in that incident that happened to you when this changed your brain chemistry.
Mhm.
So I think like it's so important to dig deep into these patterns.
Yeah.
It's hard though, because not everyone's going to open up. And unfortunately, as mental health providers, right? Unfortunately, as people who have to process this with our patients, it's hard. Like you were talking about, has your mother gone to therapy, right? You asked her.
Mhm.
It's so hard to change that cycle because you're not just working with one person. You're also explaining to your patient why her mother is doing this to her or
Right.
was doing this to her.
Right.
So you're unpacking that history and you're bringing it over to her personal reactions and how she observes the world, right? Perceives the world. So it's just there's just so much, right? And as a therapist, for me personally, in the beginning when I started working with people that had been through, it was a little bit overwhelming, and for the reason being is just because I've seen it live in child welfare. I've seen the crisis. I've seen the crisis transpire, and now I'm on the other end of it, and I'm watching the results.
Well, to answer your question as far as how I help patients process it, I use a lot of different modalities when it comes to therapy. And so a lot of patients actually end up coming to me because they feel that CBT, which is what a lot of therapists use, has not worked for them. I tend to use a lot of psychodynamic, which I think is really important. I use attachment theory, psychodynamic, obviously CBT. I tend to go in and out of their childhood, and I let them lead me. One of the things I always tell my patients when we first start working together is I'm going to interrupt you all the time. It's not that I'm trying to be rude, it's that I'm putting puzzle pieces together. And so if I hear a patient say something, excuse me, that connects for me to their childhood, I use that and then I'll go into their childhood and ask them questions. A lot of patients can become uncomfortable with that, so you have to do that once you've built a relationship with your patient, number one. Number two, allowing them to go where they're comfortable, pushing a little bit, just pushing them a little bit to their limit, because as you push a little bit and a little bit, it's kind of like trying to open that door. Interestingly enough, what happens, I've had a lot of success with patients with this. At first, some patients will say, no, I'm totally healed. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've totally forgiven so and so. But then I go, but then why are you feeling triggered? Why are you feeling, and so they can get defensive on that. I have a patient who has done such a fantastic job. She was on 100 milligrams of Zoloft when I first started seeing her. She had pretty significant stuff going on, and she's almost at the point of getting off the medication 3 years later, right? But she's really excited about that. That was her goal, and so we worked towards that. But get this, her two triggers, dad and husband. And they're not abusive or anything, but the way they were raised. She is a very modern, like,
If her dad and her
her
husband.
dad and her husband are her triggers. And it
But
was
you know what's very interesting? I'm sorry I'm interrupting you for a second, but a lot of the times when your trigger is your dad, you subconsciously pick a husband that reminds you of your dad. It's so crazy how the mind works, right? Because in theory, you don't want anyone like your dad, right? You want the opposite of that,
well,
especially
sometimes.
if it's your
My dad
trigger.
was awesome, so I don't know.
No, 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 not your dad. I
No, I
mean
know him in
somebody
general, yeah.
who is a trigger, right? Like
Yeah.
who let's say your dad was abusive for whatever reason. Let's say he was emotionally unavailable parent and you went through that cycle, right? Why would a person pick someone who is exactly like their father if this is not
You
because
brought
they're
a
used to it?
you brought culture up earlier, which is a really important topic. She's Latina.
Hmm.
And but we've come to find out she's a very modern Latina. I am partially Latina too, so I feel like I can speak on this. She married a Latino man. Her father's Latino, so in her words, there's very like machismo attitudes.
Machismo.
The way that women are in the kitchen and they clean and they do this and blah 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 blah. And she realized that she was just really uncomfortable with that constantly with the women and the way they. And as a matter of fact, she was stating how her dad, it was all girls that they had, and she felt like if she dressed up more like a boy, that maybe her dad would love her more, want to be around her more. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, having a boy is a very big deal
Yeah.
in that culture.
So
Yeah.
for her, what she started to notice was is like even her mother-in-law, like everything started bothering her. She started doing therapy. She had severe depression, and now she's learned to control and anxiety. And she's just done a beautiful job. I mean, she really puts the work in. She takes notes in sessions and stuff, which is going to bring up another point as far as when you're in sessions. But I'll get to that in a second. But she came to realize that she was living a life. She was acting as someone that she didn't want to be. The proper Latina woman, right? And she's gotten to a point where she's like, yeah, I don't really care. You're gonna either accept me as how I am, and I'm just gonna be, or, and I'm telling you, it's like that anxiety, just kind of like, yeah, I'm done. And get this, and I told her, I said, there is the distinct possibility that once you assert yourself and who you are, that your husband slowly will come around. But it's
They're not
not.
together?
Yeah, they're still together.
Okay, okay.
And she's totally forgiven her father. We just had this in the last session. Totally to the point she goes, I feel compassion and I feel bad for him, but I don't feel anxious around him anymore. And her husband is actually communicating more. He cried to her the other day. And so because of her strength and living her authentic self, she has changed. She broke the cycle.
That's
She
beautiful.
she's changing him slightly without saying you need to change. She just changed herself. He started changing with her. Her children, she has taught them to talk to her about anything. They can feel safe with her. And her children, she's telling me they're coming to her. Boys, she's got two boys and a girl. So she broke the cycle. She worked extremely hard though. So this is the other point I wanted to make. When you go to therapy, you gotta know. I mean, I always tell my patients, you guys are the bravest people possible because you're choosing to come into therapy. You're choosing to open up old wounds, gonna put some salt in that wound.
Yeah.
You're choosing to look at it because you can go to therapy and talk and but not get to the deep root stuff, right? So the people that do the actual healing are those who are like, listen, this is gonna hurt, this is gonna suck. Oh, and by the way, it's not immediate gratification. You have to like go up that hill. I mean, my patients are fantastic. I mean, they open up their wounds. But this goes back into psychodynamic. I go in and out of their childhood, and until they're comfortable and they go, oh,
Yeah.
and then we get more work done.
But I noticed that a lot of people go into therapy because they think the therapist is going to just have this
Magic pill.
resolution, magic potion
It's like
that they're
we're
gonna.
the fairy godmother in Cinderella. Yeah,
Right.
you're
It's like,
right.
and believe me, if I had that, I would have given it to all of them so that they could
Absolutely.
heal and let it go.
Yeah.
But going to therapy it's not enough. You need to be ready. So sometimes it might take several cycles. Sometimes it might take several therapists because not everybody is a match.
Yeah.
It's like dating. a lot like dating.
It's so true, though.
I always tell my patients, like at our first appointment or at our intake, I'm like, look, therapy is a lot like dating, and I'm not saying it like that because you do have these. I hope you have these conversations with your partner, right? You're not always going to match with the right therapist. I'm like, so if you don't feel like there's a match, it's okay. You can break up with me. I'm not going to take it personally.
Yeah.
But I want you to feel okay with that. I
Yeah.
don't want you to keep coming and forcing because it's not going to be productive. We're here for you. We're not here for me.
I do the same thing as you, actually.
Yeah.
And I also tell the patients, I just told a patient this the other day. I also say I have that right because if I don't feel like I can provide or work with somebody, I have to let them go. And so I had a patient the other day. She said, I don't like when you do this and I don't like when you do that. Because I like to use examples. You know, as therapists, we can use ourselves as examples if we feel it's going to benefit the patient. I also like to use success stories of other patients so that they know how the work has happened. Not that everyone's the same, but so I had this patient that she says, well, I don't like, when you use these examples and these, and I was like, I said, you might want to consider a different therapist because these are the modalities I use. This is how I work. I said, and actually, all of my patients, with the exception of you, I said to her, all of my patients actually like that because they feel like they're part of something. It's not just
Yeah.
them working through this, it's not just them dealing with something. And that feels kind of awesome to know, like, oh, it's not just me. Once I did tell her that, she goes, well, wait, I think it's a little premature. I think we should wait. I'm like, sure. I said, but I want you to know if you're not comfortable, that's okay. And if I'm not comfortable, that's okay. But as you
Right.
said, therapy, that relationship requires a lot of trust so that you can really heal the patient.
Yeah, and sometimes you're hitting walls. You could be hitting walls for weeks, for months sometimes. But you have to see that it's working little by little, even if it's baby steps. If you see that the patient is stuck as a professional, it's important to address it and say, hey, I really think you would benefit from, first of all, not the modality I'm using. Maybe you would benefit from something else. And I really think that you should start anew with someone else. I think first of all, sometimes if it's a man, a male client, patient, depending on the issue, some of them don't feel comfortable with women therapists if they're dealing with certain issues. So it's not a match. Maybe
Yeah,
some of them
sure.
need, sometimes it's sex specific. Sometimes it's just sensitivity, culture sensitivity. I hate to admit it, but not all of us are educated in all the cultures. We don't know. We ask questions. Obviously, if you're a professional, you're going to do your research once you find out who your patient is, but not everybody is aware. Like awareness is not just because you're a therapist doesn't mean you have awareness of everything that you're doing,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I love transparency. But going back to our origin of this discussion, the generational trauma, it's so important that's why I kind of put this in there. It's so important to have that connection with your therapist where you feel that you could go back into it because people like, trauma, you block things out.
Yeah.
Your brain pushes the memories out of your brain on purpose to protect you. It self-protects by blocking these things. So to remove these blockages, you have to have a therapist that you really trust. You need to have a person that you're like, we're going in. We're going to go in and we're going to go backwards, right? That's one of the most effective ways I feel we're all going backwards. Like when you're working with a patient to go backwards, like here we are, but how do we get here?
I do want to maybe challenge you on something, so your thoughts. I wouldn't say that your brain removes it, but
Blocks it.
okay,
Blocks it.
okay, because yeah, it definitely like blocks it and hides it. But that because it's blocked and you can't remember it, that's where the physical symptoms come in. The
Absolutely.
anxiety. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling that
Mhm.
way? And then people are like, I don't understand what's going on. And that's why, as you said, it's really important to. Again, I think people should know that it's a slow process. I mean, it would be a shock to someone to have to open up so many different things. So I think that's another really important point that needs to be said is that if you're going to do therapy, number one, be willing to be honest with your therapist. I mean, you can't just go in there and be like, no, everything's great, everything's fine. But I think also on the side of the therapist, depending on the therapist, I know you and I are which we get in there. Not all therapists do that, right? And so I think on the therapist side too, in order to work with generational trauma and emotional unavailability of a parent, I think it's really important for a therapist to be okay with digging in deep and asking some difficult questions, watching the patient's reaction, asking the patient how that makes them feel, getting that, bodily sensations.
Yeah,
So I
you
think,
have to probe.
yeah, a lot of therapists don't probe, and that's okay because they have a different way of working.
They don't probe because they're waiting for the patient to feel comfortable to disclose. I don't think, I mean, don't get me wrong, it might work for some people, right? It might work for people who are emotionally aware of why they're there, right? Like some people just go to deal with issues, like specific issues. They're like, listen, like when my mom passed away, I went for grief counseling. I went because I lost my mother and I didn't know how to cope because I wasn't here when she passed. I came, I never got a chance to say goodbye. So it was just like ripped out of my heart for it didn't make sense, right? So when I went to the therapist, she was great. I did have to finish with her because I felt okay after. I won't go into it because
Yeah,
anyway.
I know the story, which is why I'm laughing a little bit.
Yeah, but I did feel relief after we had those conversations. I needed about 4 or 5 sessions. For me, that was enough because I needed to have the conversation with my mother.
That was also specific. That
Yeah,
was a
that was
very
very, very
specific.
specific. It was very specific. Being a therapist, I knew what I needed. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't know how to do it on my own. I didn't know, I couldn't do it with my friends because it's not going to come out the way that it needs to come out because then you're censoring and you're thinking, well, I don't want them to know this and that, blah, blah, blah. So she served her purpose. It was very effective for me. But, not everyone has that. Not everyone understands. Like, I had to terminate a grieving patient once because she didn't know what end to start. She didn't want to do the work. She was in a spot where, like, and don't get me wrong, I made sure she had resources. I made sure that she wasn't just
Yeah, of
left
course, of course.
for nothing. I did tell her maybe she needs a different therapist. However, with me, it was very tough for her because she was not serious about therapy.
Yeah.
She was grieving. She lost her child, but she wasn't consistent with coming.
She wasn't ready.
She wasn't ready. She wasn't consistent with coming. She wasn't disclosing. She wasn't talking. It felt like pulling teeth a lot of the time when you're trying to. I mean, a conversation, therapy session needs to be a conversation, right? From both ends.
Well, that's what you go for.
That's what you hope for. But like as a therapist, it's important for you to kind of like lead them into the direction and make them feel comfortable to disclose. But most of the conversation needs to be coming from the patient because you're learning, you're observing, you're kind of putting the points together. You pause them for a second and you ask them to process what they just said
Yeah.
and you kind of throw in what you gathered from other sessions and like kind of make it I kind of say you have a salad that you've mixed and when you're doing this you're kind of taking all the ingredients apart when you have these conversations and you kind of explain why each ingredient went into the salad so
Well, so this gets to the point of what you were asking earlier.
yeah.
How do you work with it? How do you fix this? And I think that you've kind of hit that point where you need to be willing to open up to your therapist. If you're not ready, that's okay, but you're just wasting each other's time if you go to therapy. So, number one, figure out what's going on within you. Like, what's bringing you to therapy? Number two, know that it's going to take for this topic, like, with you with the grieving, for you, it was 4 or 5 sessions. That was a very specific topic. I think it's important for people to know that with emotional unavailability and generational trauma, this is going to be, you're going to build a long
Could
relationship
be
with
years.
it's years. And so, number two, are you willing to commit? So, okay, I'm feeling this or that. This is why I want to go to therapy. Am I willing to commit? And commit means time and conversation, opening up, being willing to say, listen, I'm going to open a little bit more here or there. Trusting, talk to your therapist. Do you like your therapist? Your therapist, you need to interview that person. Are you willing to open up to them?
Yeah.
And then, when the difficult conversations come, again, this is where the trust of the therapist is really important. Knowing that your therapist has your back and is going to lead you. But it's a long process. It's a painful process. It's also very rewarding at the end, especially when you're the cycle breaker. It's kind of like this. Now, something that I do want to say, again, we have to go through difficult things to strengthen ourselves. So it's not like anyone who has anxiety or depression or anything of that sort. It's not like it just goes away. You learn to deal with it. You learn why you're dealing with it, what happened, and I have control of my body. I have control of my thoughts, and I know now how to work with the physical symptoms instead of like it's gone. No, it's not. I mean, it's gone, but like you said, the chemical makeup, which we actually should do a show on that. But the chemical
I
makeup.
think it's also important to like when you're having a reaction, something triggering, you have to pause and ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? Why? And you have to wait for it to come to you because it's not going to be instant.
And you have to be patient with that. You can't
You
start
have
to
to
get
have.
anxious over it. You have to go, okay,
Right.
something's coming up for me. I'm just going to sit with it. And by the way,
Yes.
actually, I see that a lot when you start opening up. Audience should know my experience with patients. Once you're willing to open up and things start to happen, more memories start to come actually. Because
Yeah.
you've opened it up and it's like, oh, and so that's something else that's really interesting and actually kind of fun to be able to see.
Yeah, and also, you were talking about like your patient with her mother, right? It's so important that when they're already like in the healing stages, right? Because it's a long road, but at the end, like it's so important to learn that it's possible to reparent yourself. It's
Absolutely.
possible to reparent even your parents
Yeah.
because you're changing behaviors and they start changing with you. You could retrain your kids, rechange their whole way of, like you were saying about your patient. She taught her kids to speak to her, to have, there's no topics that we can't discuss. There's nothing that, I'm going to not love you for. If you tell me so, I'm still going to love you no matter what you did. And we're going to figure this out together. It's so important to have that awareness because people don't believe it. People don't believe it because of living for so long in this fear, in this constant state where they don't know if they're going to be loved. They don't have emotionally available. The parents might pay for stuff, or they might give them stuff, or they might bring you food, but they're not emotionally available for you. They don't sit down with you and ask you, hey, how are you? How are you feeling, honey?
Yeah, so
Let me give you
important.
a hug. I love you. I missed you. That means so much. It's so small, but it means everything.
Well, I mean, I think we will probably have to do another show on this at a certain point, but I would love comments from our listeners on what they've
Yeah.
learned, what more they want to hear. I would love to hear about that because this is such an important topic. It can be difficult, but my hope is that listeners start to kind of analyze themselves and go, huh, how do I feel about this? Do I need to do something?
Yeah.
So
Sometimes you might even realize that something like this might have been your childhood and you never actually um, sought help or figured it out as to why you react the way that you do.
I also
But
think it's important for us to recognize the fact that it's not that the parent is a bad parent necessarily.
no,
Sometimes they are. It's that they
no.
just didn't know any better. And so I'd like to recognize that because my mom's a great person. She just didn't know better. And even now, there's certain things that she can't connect with. But because of my healing journey, I'm like, "Oh, I get it. She's got
Yeah.
to do her own work. So I do want to say, there are some shitty people out there. Let's fit, shitty parents. I'm not going to
Some people
sugarcoat that.
shouldn't be parents. Some people should not be parents.
But an
It's very,
emotionally unavailable person doesn't mean you're a bad person.
yeah.
Just means
No,
that
it just means you're not healed. That's all it
well,
means.
and it just means that there's generational trauma.
Possibly, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. We don't know until we know. Until we open up and find that specific point where it happened to them and this changed the whole idea of what love is, of what parenting is sometimes. So I'm gonna wrap this up.
Yeah.
Until further ado, guys, thank you for joining us for this podcast. It was a pleasure having this discussion. We'll see you next Tuesday. Bye bye.